women live at the intersection of so many systemic disparities. The abuse, the deterioration caused by the gap-induced pressure of both gender and race. Right now, we're sitting in that intersection. Can you feel that? Right now, we're in that intersection. And I don't know if all of you know the significance of this specific intersection, but I'm going to highlight that right now. I'd like to say the name Kendra James. Let's say it again. Kendra James. Kendra James. This was the final place that Kendra James took her final breaths. This intersection. Kendra James was in the car with two other gentlemen, and they were pulled over for failing to stop at a stop sign. How many of you have failed to stop at a stop sign? How many of you have failed at stopping at a stop sign and realized your life could be in danger? Let's take another breath for that. The gentleman that Kendra James was with had warrants for their arrest, and they were detained. Kendra James also had warrants out for her arrest for failing to appear in court. Officer Bean, who pulled them over, noticed Kendra and recognized her and called for some reinforcements. Kenneth Reynolds and Scott McAllister were called to the scene. When the two gentlemen were detained, Kendra then climbed into the driver's seat, at which the officer has claimed that she attempted to flee the scene. Let me make a note. Kendra James was 21 years old. 21 years old. She tried to flee the scene of some mess that she's made based on lack of experience because she's 21 years old. And in those moments when the officer realized that Kendra James was trying to flee the scene, he began to process how he was going to apprehend her. His first step was putting most of his body through the window and attempting to drag her body out by her hair. Let's think about that for a second. Let's visualize that. You think that's gonna work? You think she's gonna get pulled out of this car by her hair without some severe bodily injuries? He failed that, instead pulled her wig off and began his struggle to maintain control. And in that struggle, he then reached for his pepper spray. That's his next step, pepper spray her. Failed that too. And in that scramble, he then found his taser and attempted to tase Kendra James. The taser did not inject itself into her neck, and so he continued to struggle for control and didn't know how to de-escalate himself. When he failed with the taser, he then grabbed his gun and placed it against her head. He demanded she turn the engine off. And he claims that she continued to try to flee the scene. And in those moments, the officer felt as though his life was in danger as he placed the gun to this 21-year-old woman's head. His life was now in danger in his eyes, and therefore he felt justified to pull the trigger. He pulled the trigger The bullet entered her hip and traveled to her ribs, killed her. All of this is hard to process, right? The actions that followed shows that this was not hard to process for the officers involved.
No, my time for the movie.
After Kendra James was shot, she was then removed from the car and handcuffed on the ground, left there while the crime perimeter was set. They did not check her vitals. Claimed they thought she was pretending to be unconscious. So let me repeat that for some more detail. They dragged her body from the car after shooting this woman, placed her in handcuffs, and left her there without checking her vitals. The main officer involved with the shooting then felt it was appropriate for him to travel to the North Precinct to use the bathroom, while Kendra James laid dead on this intersection. The officers then went to dinner before even discussing this with any detectives. There were no criminal charges filed. Kendra James, I said Kendra James. Kendra James will not ever be able to speak her own name. She will never travel across this inner pass. Kendra James deserves so much more than that. When I listen to this story, I can't help but notice the impulsivity, right? Almost a human condition to be impulsive. Impulsivity is defined as poorly conceived, prematurely expressed, unnecessarily risky, and inappropriate to the situation. A behavior that is often improved and controlled through things like experience and treatment and training and education. Remember, Kendra James was 21 years old. A lot of that seems difficult to attain in 21 years. The officer, on the other hand, should have had all of these things covered as a bare minimum in holding a position of protection. To have possession of a gun. This should be a bare minimum when you are literally holding the public's life in your hands. Kendra's impulsive behavior led to her death, while the officer's impulsivity led to the death of a 21-year-old woman and another day on the job. Let that sink in.